PFF Forecast. You and I, we did a mock. Actually, the math did a mock. We kind of just, we put it out there.
Yep.
And so we are going to talk, we did a lot of the legwork yesterday, but we're going to talk about the big questions that we had from that mock. You wrote one of my favorite pieces. I'm going to make you talk about it, about defense, and a little bit about what actually matters on defense. We have some Tom Brady hyperbole, and then a little Cincy Y to close it out. You ready to rock?
I am.
Or mock?
Can we comment on the niceness of our new podcast room here? Like, we got the GOAT back here, Mahomes.
Oh, I thought you were talking about me.
Oh yeah, well, and then you over here on the side with me at the Super Bowl, and then Wilson, Murray. Wow, this is great.
I'm not gonna lie. I woke up this morning. I thought about what I had on the docket for today. I'm usually really excited about the podcast, but I thought about how much more comfortable it is in here, and how I feel like if I could choose a spot where I would want to just hang out and talk, this would be pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I would maybe prefer a beach instead of like mic airs and some soundboard. No offense. And maybe a margarita instead of water. But that's really
water out of a wooden bottle. Yeah. This has that feel that we used to have with when we used to do the backroom chats with Solomon Wilcots, but it's actually in the podcast room. So
it's still a back room. You know what I was watching last night was this guy walking across the volcano. Did you see this?
I obviously got a secondhand contact high from Twitter.
So the only things that are trending are something political or coronavirus. So ABC is like, hey, how about a guy in a gas mask walking above a volcano? Can I interest you? And of course I was very interested. And really he's walking across with a harness. It didn't feel like there was any way he could die. So with that being said, I would ask you, without training, if I said, hey, I'm going to strap a harness to you, you have to walk across this volcano, would you do it and you could have any player in the NFL join your favorite team? How many players would you do that for?
None. Yeah, because my favorite team has Patrick Mahomes. So
no, that's the fucking point. You don't have Patrick Mahomes on your team.
I see. Sure, one.
That's the only one.
Well, I mean, my thing is the chance that some eruption's going to happen beneath me,
right,
is too grave.
I mean, you could fall.
I'll do it once.
I would presume that falling carries some risk of bodily harm. You probably don't die. You could sprain 2 calves.
Or or something can erupt beneath me.
Right.
And I could still not fall, but I could be singed from the waist down.
Yeah, and apparently there are potential deadly gases that spontaneously erupt, hence the gas mask.
Right. So if my favorite team, which it does, has Patrick Mahomes, then none.
Oh, interesting. The Vikings don't have Patrick Mahomes. Depends what year it is.
It depends upon what year it is. You're right.
I'm with you. I think Patrick Mahomes is the only one. And I don't.
What about Russ? Russ is very good. Russ is worthy of that distinction, I think, sometimes.
He is. I would like to believe that if I did that. See, I like Russell Wilson a lot as a football player. I'm not the biggest Russell Wilson just overall guy fan. I think I would need to be all in on this guy.
He has some
I would do it for Tom Brady maybe 5 years ago.
Well, here's the question. If you're the San Francisco 49ers, what would you do for Tom Brady?
Would you walk across him? Okay, we're going to talk about him in a second. Anyways, that tells you how stupid the sports landscape is. Should we talk about some of the questions that we kind of have debated regarding this mock? Actually, let's talk about the way we did the mock draft first. So it'll come out on Monday, and the goal of this was to not pull any punches with respect to doing mathematically sound things. And the key there is it's very hard to go all the way through. It's easy to do picks 1, 2, and 3 to a certain extent. It's easy maybe to get through the top 10, I think, in parts. But it's really hard to go all the way through and actually stick to your guns, because there's a lot of narrative out there that you basically have to say, no, fuck Derek Brown going at 7 or 8. He's not a guy that I'm wasting a first-round pick on.
Well, that's the thing when you look at, for example, trying to, I don't know, model these things mathematically. It's partially your player projection, so you actually have to project that a guy like Chase Young's going to be good, but you also have to stick to your broad understanding of the league. So for me, for example, that Muti, for example, is a guard who I think is very good, but the question, and a lot better as a projection than any other guard in the entire class. But then I think to myself, okay, is it still a good positional value for a team in the later end of the first round to take him? Derek Brown, as far as run defense, is as good as anybody on the defensive line in this draft. But does run defense matter? And then you literally look, and I wrote the article about his projection up on PFF yesterday, and people mostly Auburn fans got really upset. And it's well, look at the worst teams in the NFL in terms of yards per carry allowed: Green Bay, San Francisco, Kansas City, playoff teams. And it's yeah, sure, you can buy this thing, but are you actually buying team wins? You're not. This time of year, you are not buying all pros. You are buying wins. And if you're not buying wins, you're wasting your time.
Then what are we doing here?
What are we doing here?
One of the things that we did kind of a rough draft last night, and one of the things that I wrote in part of the intro was, you do not get a ring, and you said something similar to this last year. You do not get a ring because the guy you took in the first round wins Rookie of the Year.
No.
You don't. And that's exactly what happened to the New York Giants. And the New York Giants then went and picked a quarterback the very next year, and their hopes and dreams ride with that quarterback. How many people do you hear going, you know what? The Giants will be great if Saquon Barkley rushes for 2,000 yards, or has 2,500 all-purpose yards, or catches 100 passes. No one is saying that. People are saying the New York Giants will be great if Daniel Jones, in some cases, gets protected or has a really good year.
And it's even worse in that respect, because now we're talking, so Tampa Bay fans were saying, well, Vita Vea was taken in the top 15. We have the best run defense in the NFL
Great.
now.
Congratulations.
And it's yeah, that's awesome, but you don't get anything for it.
No, to be fair, they might hang a banner in Tampa Bay for that.
That's what I'm saying. The Saquon, you look back okay, who are the sort of generational running backs? Adrian Peterson won one playoff game as a member of the Minnesota Vikings, and the game was started by Brett Favre.
Here's a legit question. Who is the most, that term is totally overused, right?
Yeah.
But if you were actually to look back at the past 20 years, so since 2000,
yeah,
how many, because I actually do believe there are a couple of generational running backs in terms of these guys were before their time and they really redefined the way the position is used.
Yeah.
I'm going to put LaDainian Tomlinson on that list. I actually think Darren Sproles is weirdly on that list.
Yeah, but is he, though, in the sense that no one used draft capital on him? For me, a generational talent has to be somebody.
That's part of it, though. I'm thinking of it from my perspective.
Yeah.
He illuminated that, okay, LT was look, you can be a pass-catching force at running back position. And I would say, well, Darren Sproles showed you that you can do that without investing first-round capital on it.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyways,
so for me, the one player that I will cede that was amazing was Marshall Faulk. And here's the really funny thing about Marshall Faulk. So Faulk drafted second overall by the Colts. Colts are basically, they made the AFC Championship game in '95, but basically terrible. So bad that they got the number one pick for Peyton Manning in '98. So bad that they had the fourth overall pick in 1999. 1999 was the year that Mike Ditka traded an entire draft plus the following year's first and third round pick to move up to get Ricky Williams. That same year, the Rams were able to get take a second round pick and a fifth round pick and get Marshall Faulk. The brilliant thing about Marshall Faulk was that Rams offense, the greatest show on turf, set all the records. Faulk had 1, 2, 3, 4 games out of all those games, that entire season where he carried the ball more than 20 times. The best running backs, and people are like, oh, should the Chiefs draft Jonathan Taylor? Should they trade for Christian McCaffrey? All kind of stuff. The best running backs are the ones that don't make you run the football. Because the issue is anytime you buy into that position, you have to give them carries in a way to justify the capital that went into that player, and that makes your offense, by definition, weaker.
Okay, the first question we have on our list of mock questions is when we said, hey, we're writing a mock, a lot of the people that know what we stand for immediately go, how many quarterbacks? 5? 6? It's like LeBron and D Wade when they went to Miami. Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6. And I actually believe that our answer is going to end up very much like the number of championships that team won. So the first 2 are obvious. We're taking Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. There is the argument for taking more guys after that would be, look, should I take the 4th receiver off the board or the 3rd quarterback? Yeah. And I know that there are tail opportunities, right? Like if Justin Herbert figures it all out, he's obviously going to be worth more than the 3rd wide receiver, whoever it is. Well, maybe we'll talk about that in a second. What could possibly keep you from taking a shot on the Justin Herberts, the Josh Loves, the Jordan Loves, even like I don't know who else you want to throw in there. Tyler Huntley looks really good.
The thing that's keeping me from taking them in round 1 is the fact that I don't think they're going to be very good. Like there's not a greater than puncher's chance that they're. So
what if? Okay, let me ask you this. So what if? Who was the most valuable rookie last year? Was
Gardner Minshew.
Okay.
Who was taken where?
Right. No. Yeah. I get that. My point being is he was taken there because the league doesn't, in large part, understand how to value quarterbacks.
In some ways, properly valued him while improperly valuing everybody drafted before him, other than Kyler, in my opinion.
Right. But if you were the Jaguars, for example, you should have justified taking him far sooner.
Sure. I mean, yes. I also think though that
is Justin Herbert worse than Gardner Minshew?
I think they're closer than people think.
I agree.
And the other thing, so like, is
I'd rather have Gardner Minshew.
Is Anthony Gordon all that much? Because Anthony Gordon,
I'd walk across a volcano for Gardner Minshew.
I wrote an article about Anthony Gordon. Gordon, Luke Falk before him, Gardner Minshew before him. Anthony Gordon had the most yards per attempt in that offense than any of those players in the Leach system.
True.
He only had the 1 year as a starter. He did throw a lot of interceptions. But, like, we talk ourselves into not liking him for a bevy of reasons. And then we talk ourselves into liking Jordan Love, who is every bit as turnover prone and, frankly, bad. I mean, Jordan Love last season was basically an average college football player. And I understand that the context around him is something, but
it's a Josh Allen type thing.
Yeah, we talked about this though. Like if you can't throw the ball accurately consistently in college, like we'll find that out because we actually chart drops and receiver error and all that kind of stuff. And it's like I understand that he's got a great arm and I understand that he's got a lot of talent, but that's the type of player you take in round 4.
Okay, so then let's do this. Let's say this: you have to take a quarterback. Tua and Burrow are off the board. Context agnostic, who are you taking?
If I have to take a quarterback, in all honesty, from what I've looked at, Josh Love has some of the best fundamentals in terms of the data that I've seen.
Okay,
I don't like, and that's the thing. So, this got itself into our mock a little bit, which I think is actually smart. I'm not taking Josh Love in the first round, even though our projections like him. Our projections are eliminating players, right? They're pushing them down the list, and it's making us consider, right? But we're going to sort of split the difference in the case where we like a player, the data likes a player, and our people like our friend Mike, and Austin don't. We're going to split the difference there, right? But that's the tricky thing. Like I'm not going to talk. I'm much more likely to talk myself out of a player than I am to talk myself into a player, and that's like, I'm going to talk myself out of a player who has good data, maybe bad scouting, then I'm far more likely that I'm going to talk myself into a player who has bad data and good scouting.
And I think it's worth looking back at some of the past draft classes. So Josh Allen is a really good example. Josh Allen, we weren't saying was undraftable.
Nope.
We also weren't taking him in the top 20, right? I think he is a guy that was a you take a shot on this guy in the second round. So if we were doing this a couple of years ago, you'd be saying, okay, well, Josh Allen is a guy that, his fundamentals are just really poor. And that's borne out perfectly well in the NFL. The Buffalo Bills can't score the football, and people go crazy about this, but they have gone and said, the reason we're drafting this guy is he has a cannon of an arm. And then they realized he's one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks throwing the ball downfield. So they've rejiggered their offense to basically say, hey, actually throw the ball short because that's the only place you have a shot at completing passes, and then run the ball a bunch.
To your point, I think if you polled Buffalo Bills fans on Twitter, who had the more efficient offense, the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Buffalo Bills, people don't realize that the Jaguars average 0.2 of a yard per play more than the Buffalo Bills. People think that Josh Allen led a successful offense last year. He did not. And the Jaguars, all their faults, John DeFilippo being the offensive coordinator, having basically one wide receiver who's any good, a replacement level left tackle, and a noodle for an arm in Gardner Minshew in the 6th round, was a more efficient offense than, in our opinion, one of the sharpest teams in the NFL building an infrastructure around Josh Allen to win. The Jaguars got more efficiency offensively than, and they had Fat Lenny running the football as opposed to the Bills, who Frank Gore's better than Fat Lenny, and the
what's funny?
The running back, the little running back that they got is probably better than.
If you polled people, just like general NFL fans, and you're like, hey, who's the Jaguars' best player? I would say 80% go Leonard Fournette, which is fucking hilarious.
I wrote about this in the Jonathan Taylor article because my conclusion was Jonathan Taylor's a great prospect, but drafting him eventually is going to ask you to make some dumb decisions. Leonard Fournette being okay as a rookie made the Jaguars think, hey, we can win with this formula, buy into Blake Bortles, lean into that defense. And we've seen what happened to that defense over the last 2-3 years.
It's not even there anymore.
Exactly.
You mentioned, so let's stick with the quarterbacks thing here for a second, and then we can move to running backs because I do think that's an interesting question. You have two. We are basically saying, look, as much as we believe in taking shots on guys, if you take a shot on a guy whose mean projection, his average outcome is basically replacement level, then you're screwing yourself. Maybe it's a little above, right? But think about it this way. If your team's 1 through 10, and I would kind of segment them out this way. Okay, you have the teams that really need a franchise quarterback. And a lot of those teams are picking in the top 10. There are other players who are going to be far above replacement level on average at valuable positions that you can take. Receiver, corner, and a couple of edge players, right? Then you go to picks 10 through 20. And you go, okay, these teams are in a weird situation because they're not so bad that they're bottoming out. So what is the good of taking a guy that's probably just going to compete for a starting role?
Well, that's the tricky part about drafting a quarterback, because if the guy plays, his wins above replacement will almost always be 3 to 4 times more. But if the guy's not good enough to play, and we've seen that with Paxton Lynch, we've seen that with I'm trying to think of E.J. Manuel is a guy who wasn't good enough to play. Cardale Jones is a guy. Geno Smith. All those guys are sort of not even good enough to play. Then it's like wasting a draft pick.
Right. Let me give you an example. The Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are sitting there at 15. They took a quarterback in Drew Lock in the 2nd round last year. There's no reason for them to take a shot on one of these guys who's basically just doubling down on Drew Lock when you could take a player that can legitimately help your team, and you can go back and get a quarterback later on if Drew Lock doesn't work.
And here's the thing with Denver. Okay, we didn't like Drew Lock, but that's all of these things are, we didn't like Drew Lock relative to where he's picked. I don't like Jonathan Taylor as a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. If you can get him at 50, 60, he's an amazing draft pick.
Still too high for me.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying? We don't like these. If you can get Jordan Love in the 4th round, have at it. Go for it. That's, to me,
Yes, I mean, that's my point with the Broncos,
So you
right?
look at the Broncos.
Go take a flyer in the second round.
People said, okay, they're going to take Drew Lock at 10, which would be a colossal mistake.
Yep.
And Broncos fans now, after 5 starts, are going to be like, oh, well, they should have just taken him at 10. No, they traded back. The Steelers would go up to get kind of a thumper at linebacker. Good for them. Then now he's their third pick in the draft, right? Because they get Dalton Reisner before him to help protect him. They get Drew Lock. They already have Cortland Sutton in the mix. Like, now you're starting to build a team. Now you're taking better bets. And, taking him at 10 and not getting that extra capital, most of these quarterbacks are not Mahomes. Most of these quarterbacks are not Wilson. Like, you have to build an infrastructure around them. And if you mess around and overextend, if you're Tampa Bay, if you're Indianapolis, free advice, don't take Jordan Love at 13, 14, 15. If you really want him, like, hope that he gets back to the second round or something like that and build an infrastructure around him. Because if you don't, all indications are he's going to stink. Jordan Love was not able to be successful in college when his infrastructure sucked. What do you think he's going to do in the NFL?
Here's the thing. Taking a flyer on a quarterback it basically says, hey, I actually don't know a whole lot about these guys. I'm taking a flyer. So don't go out of your way to be, no. This is the right flyer. I have to overdraft him. Part of that is saying, let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to you roll the dice on a quarterback because they could be really valuable. That doesn't mean that you take them in the first round. Yeah. You roll the dice later on. So then you go on to teams like 20, through the end of the first round and even the start of the second a little bit because those teams have already picked a quarterback. And you go, okay, here's the deal. These guys already have a QB. They're trying to win now. There are legitimately players at valuable positions that you can still take that can help you win now. You've already invested capital in this quarterback. What is the point, again, in taking a flyer all the way in the first round? So I think we're going to end up with 2.
Yeah, and I think that might make people upset, but like, in my opinion, so here's the thing about Tua is like, I'm not exactly sold on him being a superstar. I think there's a significant difference between him and Burrow because of things like what Burrow was asked to do, who he did it against. And we talk about him only having 1 year of starting, being good at starting, but like in some ways he played a lot more. Like that, those LSU teams were playing longer games than the Alabama teams, the two of us. So like the sample size issue for Burrow is less pronounced than people think, and the per play efficiency relative to who he was doing against is far better than Tua's. So like people put them in the same cluster. No, what we're saying, Burrow I think projects as a legitimate superstar, and of course anything can happen, but Tua projects to me as a starting caliber NFL quarterback. And if that's the case, you take him as high as you have to. The other guys do not even, to me, project as starting caliber NFL quarterbacks. So you take flyers on them late, a la Drew Lock.
Everyone projects guys in the NFL draft at their like 80th percentile.
Yeah.
Everyone looks at these guys with rose-colored glasses and goes, you know what? What I believe is the average for this guy is really his ceiling in a lot of cases. And on average, Tua, a lot closer to average than people want to give him credit for. And the same is true with Burrow. He, on average, okay, yes, better than average quarterback, but there are a lot of those guys out there, right? Yeah, Jimmy G is a great example, and people are trying to get rid of him. So we need to ground ourselves in reality a little bit with these quarterbacks. The other thing with Tua that's very interesting, and let's just talk about the pick number 2, because this is our next big question is, what do you do at 2? And he has this incredible second half, right, in the championship game. That sets everything up. That sets the narrative for him. Mm-hmm. He then goes out and has a really tremendous year, right? They end up losing in the championship. And then has a catastrophic year where a lot of injuries happen. Things don't go, he has obviously the really bad injury at the end that ends the season.
He didn't have the opportunity in a lot of ways to play. Like the way that this schedule turned out, he didn't have an opportunity to play his best against good teams, which influences our system a lot. So Burrow playing awesome against Clemson is
huge.
And Tua not being able to play a lot of those games is bad for him.
And you can look at this, and a lot of people, this is a question that we got asked. What do you make of that? Well, what I make of that is the variance increases. It's not necessarily, yes, does the mean move back a little bit? Sure. But what really it does, it says, I know less about this guy. And that's the thing. You're buying not only when you're saying Burrow projects better, are you buying average being higher, you're buying certainty.
Yeah. And the way that variance works in the NFL is very rarely will variance, there's a ceiling to some degree.
Sure.
So if you increase variance, the chances are the tail to the left is going to be more pronounced than the tail to the right, because the tail to the
uneven butt cheeks is what you're talking about.
The tail to the right is being, pushed forward prior by Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, and now Mahomes, and it's just difficult to say,
Tom Brady.
Everybody's like,
tail.
who's the next X, right? People have been like, who's the next Jordan? Who's the next Mahomes?
Bridget Moynihan?
Like no one, like.
So if you're at 2, we've just talked about how Tua is, a lot more average than you probably think. There are a lot of question marks there. At the same time, the guy's accuracy is absolutely phenomenal, and that is the number one thing you're looking for. The second thing you're looking for is, does this guy have a decent head on his shoulders?
Yep.
And that appears to be the case. And he doesn't, as much as he has made some boneheaded plays, overall, he has not made a high number of really catastrophic plays. He does a good job of limiting those. So you think to yourself, well, is he Jimmy G without a high number of turnover-worthy plays? And would I buy that at number 2?
Yes.
Or would I rather trade back or take Chase Young? So rank those 3 for me.
Okay, well, if I'm Washington, and we talked about this yesterday, you made fun of me mercilessly. Let's throw Alex Smith out of the equation. Jesus. So if you have Haskins and you have Tua, the probability that you get average or better quarterback play from that position is substantially bigger than if you have Haskins, Chase Young, or Haskins and then Haskins or a few picks that you generate in the later rounds, and even if you use one of those on a lesser quarterback. So to me, the question becomes, okay, are you building a good enough infrastructure for your team for average quarterback play to be something you can capitalize on? Take Cincinnati for the Marvin Lewis years. If that's the type of team you're building, then you take Tua here, because if you can get yourself average or better quarterback play, and you don't care who it is, if it's Tua or Haskins, by all means, then you do it. If you are rebuilding, so let's say you think that your team's going to stink, and average quarterback play is not going to get you anywhere near because your team's not good enough, then I think you trade back. So that would be my second preferred decision. I think the third preferred decision is to take Chase Young and hope that Haskins works out. And that last choice isn't the worst choice that anybody's ever made, but it's by far the worst of the 3.
No, it's not. But here's how I'd say it. And I need to emphasize this. I can't emphasize this enough. This is not about Chase Young, the football player. Chase Young is the best football player in this draft. Well, he and Burrow are pretty close.
I think Isaiah Simmons has a chance.
Okay,
yeah,
sure. I've made that argument too, and I'm with you. But let's just say we've picked nits, and Chase Young is the guy. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't. What he does, by definition, incurs a lower value. You can be a great pass rusher. The highest graded pass rusher last year was T.J. Watt. He was phenomenal. Number 2 was Calais Campbell. And I don't know if you followed the NFL last year. Those teams fucking stunk.
Well,
but hold on. I have an analogy for you.
Okay.
I have an analogy for you. I'm a big fan of In-N-Out.
Okay.
I love In-N-Out.
Yeah.
I would eat In-N-Out over a lot of different meals. And when I go to Los Angeles, I do my best to go to In-N-Out. But I got to be honest with you, I don't go there every time I go to Los Angeles. You know why?
Well, there's other things.
There are things that are better than In-N-Out.
Yeah.
And that's taking cost into account. Like, I get a great meal at In-N-Out for $7. But if you said, hey man, you have to spend $50, you can have, let's make it $100, make it easier. You have $100 to spend, you have to spend it. You can either go spend it on a fantastic dinner at these, 2 places that you really like where the average meal is going to cost $100, or you can spend $100 on In-N-Out. You're not going to In-N-Out.
Yeah, you're not.
So that's what taking Chase Young at this position would be. He is a fantastic player in his equivalence class of burgers that I'm buying at, for $8. He is the best. but that simply doesn't win you Super Bowls. It could get you from 6 to 7 wins, which actually hurts you.
Right.
He can get you from 7 to 8 wins, which actually hurts you because you don't have a shot.
It can get you from hungry to fed, right? But it can't get you the value that $100. And the thought experiment that because people always bring up Nick Bosa, which if Nick Mullins is starting at quarterback for the 49ers this season, they are 7-9 at best. No matter how good Nick Bosa is.
And we need to remember that Nick Bosa, as great as he was, he dominated the crappy teams that the 49ers absolutely shat all over.
Yeah.
And they won that Saints game because their offense, like they won a lot of really big close games because of how Jimmy G and the passing offense played. They were winning in the Super Bowl until that passing offense. Nick Bosa was dominating that game. What happened at the end of the game?
Nothing. They won the NFC West because in the second round they did what we're going to do a lot of times in this first round of this mock. They took a wide receiver who is explosive. They won in the playoffs because their offense has playmakers that can catch the ball, and defenses like Green Bay and Minnesota had to play subs just to respect the Emmanuel Sanders, the Deebo Samuels, of the George Kittles of the world. They did not win those games because of Nick Bosa. Like, Nick Bosa is great, and if you have all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted, by all means take him. If you don't, do not be disappointed. Do not blame Chandler Jones because the Arizona Cardinals suck.
True. Now, I would say so I'm with you in the ranking. I believe that it all depends on how the Dolphins feel or the Raiders feel or I guess maybe the Jaguars too feel about Tua. But let's say the Dolphins really value Tua, then I think the difference between picking Tua and trading down, I don't think it's that great because I think you can get a real haul. Like, I believe you could, if the Dolphins are all in, could you say, hey, give me 3 first-round picks this year and another next year? And in that case, I'm doing it. And I'm also still considering sending Dwayne Haskins to Chicago. I don't think they have anything they can actually trade me. But, I'm just keeping all options open. And I'm saying let me acquire a ton of draft capital and let me go from there. I think that's a legit number 2. I'm not considering taking Chase Young here because what I would do is I would say let me trade down. There are some great defensive players. In my mind, Isaiah Simmons, Chase Young, and Jeffrey Okudah. And one of those guys will be there. And I am very happy with my crappy team to take either one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the idea is, again, like the league, this is strange to say, but other than quarterback and offensive skill position players, predominantly tight ends and wide receivers, the NFL is not a stars league. No. You don't win with stars. You win.
Unless they play quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. And even then, like, when your quarterback is not a star, you win with stars at wide receiver and tight end. But the rest of you look at offensive line, left tackle, like what Tyron Smith does has very little effect on the Dallas Cowboys if the rest of the offensive line sucks. Running back, of course, doesn't matter all that much. But, like, the offense gets to dictate what it does, and it's going to attack, and defense to some degree do as well on the offensive line. But, like, your goal should be to build a roster that's relatively impervious to perturbations, and you don't do that by saying I need to get all pros everywhere.
Yes.
Like, people think about that as that's like the goal. Point. People think about that as the goal, but it's not. You look at, like,
you want to be prepared, and you say perturbations a lot, and I know what that means.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw it. The way to think about this is shit happens.
Yeah.
And you want your offense to be able to handle it when shit happens. And a great example of this is the Philadelphia Eagles. They won the Super Bowl with a ton of shit happening. They were able to fill in their offensive line, was just wrecked injury-wise. Yeah. They filled it in. Their quarterback got wrecked. They filled it in. Their coverage unit, by and large, stayed healthy and hasn't in future years. So, like, they were able to handle it when shit happened. I think that's a great point.
The reason that they haven't been quite as good the last few years is because the players that they've put in at some of those fragile positions have not been good enough. And so even though so it's sort of this competing, and Wentz is good enough to overcome a great deal, but having Greg Ward at wide receiver is you're just not good enough there. But you even look at defensively so Mike Renner got a lot of crap yesterday on Twitter for his whole
hair.
No, the Chiefs,
the glasses hair combo.
The Chiefs cornerback. He's like, no team with this bad of a cornerback group has ever won the Super Bowl.
Do you think when he goes to Orange Theory, they're counting, male female ratio? Like, fuck, I don't know.
No comment. So everybody's giving him.
Depends whether he's clean shaven or not that day.
Everybody was giving them crap, but it's like, where you can make substantial improvement. It's very expensive to go out there and get yourself a Josh Norman. And it's probably not going to work out. It's really expensive to go out there and get a Tremaine Johnson, and it's probably not going to work out. It's relatively cheap to do what Kansas City did and say, hey, look, Anthony Hitchens is terrible. Why don't I get somebody in there who can actually be average for a little, you know what I'm saying? Like bringing up the third and fourth best players in your defense.
No, I'm with you.
And that's cheap, right? So when you trade up and put all your eggs in one basket and look for superstars on your team, that's not great. That is not necessarily the way to go about it.
All right, the third question I have for you is we got to the Giants. And the Giants are going to be in a position to take a very good defensive player, a very good offensive tackle, or a very good wide receiver. And I think it's a very interesting thought exercise. What would you do if you're the Giants? Like, let's think about these three options. Let's say that, to make it fair, let's say that all three of those positions, the players that are available, were number one on the Giants board in their projections, right? Similar to when we're doing this, when we say, okay, the three guys still available are one or two across the board.
So if you're there and all the players you like are gone at 4?
No. All the players are still there. I'm talking about position. Wide receiver.
Oh, sure.
Tackle, and then like defensive player.
You
right?
take wide receiver. The only reason, maybe tackle, but I
because you push back on me a little bit here.
I did because, yeah, right. I did only because again I'm sort of trying to ground truth with the model, and it's like ground truth with the market, which is saying, okay, if Chase Young or Okudah are there, or the best tackle, like people are gonna give you shit if you go ahead and take a wide receiver there. But in reality, again, your goal as a team, the fastest way to win games is to accentuate your quarterback and to do things that make him successful. Yes. And the fastest way to do that is to give him weapons.
This was exactly my point. This is about Daniel Jones. You are deciding.
You've made the decision that Daniel Jones is your future.
Well, no, I would say no, but you have to find out.
Yes.
You can't be in limbo. This is the worst place you can be next year is, well, fuck. We took a great edge rusher, and he was fantastic. We just don't know about Daniel Jones yet. Yeah. You can't be in that situation.
Nope.
Similarly, you can't be in the situation where you're like, okay, Tristan Wirfs, the guy's thighs, fantastic. Austin and Mike waxed about it poetically. It was beautiful. I got sweaty. He's amazing. But if you go into next year with that wide receiving core, it doesn't matter if he has great protection. No one's getting open. Yeah. So the easiest way to find out about whether Daniel Jones is legit is to say, hey, here's a guy that's open. Get him the football. And there, for my money, is no one that is going to get open like Jerry Jeudy's going to get open. So if I'm sitting there and I'm the Giants, yeah, you can invest in tackle and pass protection and defense. You have other picks. They actually have a decent amount of draft capital, and they invested a lot of it last year, right? They picked up some nice players, right? Like they drafted a cornerback who turned out to be absolutely terrible for the first
but then improved. But you're right.
But like that's the thing is you need that. DeAndre Baker improving is not telling you anything about Daniel Jones next year.
Yes, and again, yes, it's absolutely true. I mean, and that's the tricky thing, and that's why people will see our mock draft as being relatively focused on a few things. But the fact of the matter is you have to, like, this is a league about failing quickly at the quarterback position.
Yep.
And we've seen it over and over and over and over and over again.
Can you imagine if the Cardinals ran it back with Josh Rosen this year?
But look at your Niners in the middle of last decade.
Do I have to?
So it's like, 2 decades ago, they draft Alex Smith, and he's got, by the time he gets to Harbaugh, he has 5 offensive coordinators, right?
You realize that this is like a dark time. I'm in high school,
Mike Nolan,
trying to figure my life out.
So
I'm getting deli sandwiches.
All you do
named
is
after
put,
Mike Nolan.
All you do
I'm not even kidding.
All you do is put excuses in front of Alex Smith, and you actually you give him a decent amount of plausible deniability. And so Alex Smith had a really damn good year in 2011. He was having a good year in 2012. The end result was fine, but you look at it with guys like Christian Ponder, you look at it with guys like Blaine Gabbert, you look at it with Jake Locker. You draft a quarterback and you're like, God, it's not his fault, it's our fault. We just didn't put enough around him. And it's like you're wasting seasons by putting, by not putting good players around him because you're not finding out. The thing, draft a guy, put players around him, find out if he's good or not, and move on.
We were talking about wide receiver. The argument has been between Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, who's number 1. We talked a little bit about this and on the last podcast, and the combine numbers coming in, that's a big part of our model. We turned it into an athleticism score. It was a brilliant idea on your part and has really helped us kind of intertwine the two components, athleticism and production. I am going to say right now that I would take Henry Ruggs ahead of CeeDee Lamb. Speed kills. His production was great. And I think that's going to drive some people crazy.
I think, yes. But the thing at wide receiver, which is tricky, and it's not, it hasn't always been this way. 20 years ago,
Cut that part.
20 years ago, the base offense in the NFL was 12 or 21 personnel. And you had 2 wide receivers that played the majority of the game, and you had a 3rd wide receiver that would come in on late downs, and maybe a 4th wide receiver. And that was how it worked. So if you drafted a wide receiver, and he wasn't a good all-around wide receiver, he was a bust, right? And you moved on. In today's NFL, even in round 1, it's styles make fights at the receiver position, right? So you look at a guy like DJ Moore, who's the first receiver drafted 2 years ago by Carolina. In my opinion, at the time was kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird. He's not really a complete receiver. He's got some good traits to him, but that's kind of overvaluing. And I think if you're a Carolina Panthers fan, you have to be happy with that selection. He's had a great first 2 years because the team made him do certain things. They made Curtis Samuel do other things. Greg Olsen, when he was there, he did. They play so many wide receivers now that when you draft those guys, it's very much about how they fit, right? And this is why, our colleague and pal Timo Riske, why the passing maps and looking at sort of the composition of how players run routes and how they're targeted is extremely valuable information now, because when you're looking to go find a wide receiver, you're not drafting Jerry Rice ever. You're not drafting Chris Carter ever. You're not drafting Randy Moss ever. T.O. Those guys aren't in the draft, right? You're looking at the difference between DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley. That's what you're looking at. And so if you're the Falcons, you might need a player like Ridley. If you're the Panthers, you might need a player like Moore. If you're dumb, you don't care, right? And then you put the guy in there, you're like, well, why isn't he succeeding in our offense? We're asking him to do this. Well, it's like, well, he's actually good at that. So for me at 5, between these receivers, it's very much a what does this team need type of situation, because a lot of these guys I think are equally yoked in terms of the types of player they are, right? Like Justin Jefferson is a hell of a prospect, but if you're asking him to replace Ted Ginn, you're going to fail, right? You know what I mean? If you're the Saints, it's this conversation.
Okay. Let me just say this: I watched the Kansas City Chiefs get beaten, destroyed, befuddled, torn down for 3 quarters in the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And I still sat there at the start of the 4th quarter, and you're next to me shaking like a leaf because you've come so far and it's all going to pass away. I'm trying to envision the 49ers hoisting the Lombardi Trophy, and I can't. And you know why I can't? Because the Chiefs have something that you simply cannot overcome, and that is athleticism that you can't match. They have guys that are so good at throwing the ball further than you can run, and guys that can run faster than you can.
Yep.
And to me, that is what Henry Ruggs helps bring you, that I don't think CeeDee Lamb quite does. Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't take CeeDee Lamb super high. To me, that is why I'd go
Lamb
with
is
Ruggs.
Lamb is somebody that I think is going to make.
And for the record, he projects better.
Yeah, right. And I think Lamb is somebody who. This sounds kind of like silly, but when I see him play, I think of like Nate Burleson.
Yeah.
So like a player, and like Nate was a good NFL wide receiver, not superstar, but like somebody who has great balance, makes yards after the catch, but doesn't scare you down the field. And maybe it was that Oklahoma offense and give him that opportunity because Hurts was kind of limited throwing the ball down the field. But he strikes me, and like Nate Burleson as your 2 or 3 is a fantastic weapon. When the Vikings had him and Moss, he was great. He led the team in receiving one year.
I mean, I still remember people were talking about, okay, well, like without Moss.
Yeah.
What happens?
Exactly. Yeah. So the Vikings wanted Burleson to be the one, and he failed. Right. So
he's doing great though.
Yeah, he is.
He's really good at what he does.
But if you look at but the Tyreek Hill player is sort of, and again, if you're going to draft, you're like, okay, we got to find the next Tyreek Hill. You're going to fail. But can you approximate him with Judy? Yes. I mean, we're talking about, just deep speed and like being able to make contested catches and make yards after the catch.
Dude,
like
Henry Ruggs catches a crosser, and you're like,
Yeah.
fuck, peace.
Yeah, exactly. So
and that's what I want.
So all those guys, and again, like to be, and then the other thing. So we talk about Ruggs, and we talk about Judy. There's another key component to this, which people have documented for a long time. Being able to get targeted in an offense as explosive as Alabama means that you're good because there are other studs on that team that could be targeted. So the issue with Lamb is he's literally the only Oklahoma wide receiver that was good enough to get that many targets. So but if you cream rise to the top at Alabama, you're a stud.
Yeah, I mean, those 3 receivers were insane. Okay, we have a couple more questions. One that I thought was really interesting that came up, and I want to keep this super short so we get to the rest of things. We ended up in a long debate about our top offensive tackle versus Isaiah Simmons.
Yeah.
And I think this is another situation to me where it's like, this is where team need comes in. Both these guys can be super valuable, and it depends which one are you currently more below replacement level at? Is that how you would think about it?
Yeah, because neither position is going to give you the fat tail type of thing.
Just can't help yourself.
Like linebacker, like Luke Kuechly is a tremendous player, and we ended up
Eric Eager, ass man.
So neither one of those players is going to win you a Super Bowl. Luke Kuechly is a guy who has played probably better than any linebacker we've seen, and ultimately, how the Panthers play the Super Bowl is very dependent upon the fact that Cam Newton and that offense couldn't do anything. Offensive tackle is the exact same thing. Well, so when it comes between,
they couldn't because Mike Remmers was getting bludgeoned.
Yeah, but when you look to draft so if it's between a position like wideout, quarterback, probably defensive back, and like linebacker OT, you take the explosive position that can really push a team forward. If it's between those positions that aren't exactly, the distributions are narrower for outcomes, now you're talking about what you're saying, which is need. And so you look at offensive tackle versus linebacker, it's really like, okay, well, Carolina needs.
We shouldn't call Isaiah Simmons a linebacker.
Yeah, but in the NFL today,
me calling you a power forward.
But I mean, I am.
No, but you're an offensive weapon.
I'm not. Oh, that's okay.
You're going to stretch the floor.
I mean,
I can run the pick and roll. When your calf is healthy, you're going to run up and down the court.
In 10 years.
You can guard a 5.
Look, I went like 6 years between dunks. I might go another 6 years. We'll see.
You can guard a 5, but a 3 can't guard you because of your explosion?
I am explosive. Yeah.
Okay, let's close it out with our mock questions with this one. This isn't really a question. This is a statement. I went into our discussion firmly in I will not waste a first-round pick on an interior lineman. That means Derek Brown, who, by the way, it's not Aaron Donald. I'm not saying no to Aaron Donald. I'm saying no to, like, poor man's Snacks Harrison.
Yeah, Vita
in
Vea.
the first round. Oh, great. Vita Vea.
Yeah.
That's right. Tampa Bay Buccaneers savior Vita Vea.
Tight end and defensive interior player.
That's who I'm saying no to. The player that is closest to actually getting picked in the first round, I think, that plays on the interior is a guard, which should tell you all about how I feel about Derek Brown.
Yeah, Muti had a projection. I think his win rate for any other guard was like a percentage point higher, median. And so I was trying to see.
You were trying to pawn him off on me, to be fair.
Right. Your Niners. The interesting thing is that we all knew who my Chiefs were going to draft.
Yeah.
Probably.
Stay tuned.
But.
And give me some credit. I put him right there.
You did. And you and I are similarly woke on what a linebacker should be.
I thought you were going to say similarly yoked.
Which is not true.
The thing with you trying to give, let me come back to the Super Bowl. You know what we saw in the Super Bowl? Teams that didn't invest and had a lot of backup players at interior on the offensive line. So like as great as Muti may be, you're looking at, can I get a guy that can maybe stretch the field a little bit? Can I get a corner that can be like a third corner? And that is just way more valuable.
Because ultimately in that game, Chris Jones had one pressure. He had a couple knockdown.
That batted pass was huge.
I mean, but the game was won because Frank Clark tossed Mike McGlinchey like 3 feet to the right.
Stop. You couldn't get through a single mock conversation without reminding me of McGlinchey instead of Derwin James. You can't. You just couldn't do it.
What I'm doing is implicitly calling you right. Because look,
True.
anybody can
That's
look.
fair.
Anybody can look back.
No one's going to give me credit for that. And I remember I was much younger in this company, and
it was our first ever live appearance
show.
in this very room.
But I remember writing a piece, I might try and go find it, about the 49ers draft. And I tried so hard to make sure that I wrote it in a way that wasn't mean. Because I have a ton of respect for John Lynch. It's not like I'm a fan that's irrational. I actually did have a ton of respect for what he was doing and what he was building. And I tried so hard to write this paragraph that was like, I can't believe they didn't take Derwin fucking James. The guy's an absolute freak.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you doing? You took a tackle that looks old and is better at run blocking than pass blocking. I can't fucking believe it.
Derwin James probably would have tackled Damian Williams more than
Stop.
than
Stop
Kawan
it.
Alexander did.
Stop it.
But like
I thought I did a good job, by the way. I didn't think I was mean, and I didn't intend to be.
And McGlinchey has had his moments of being bad,
fine.
but he's been fine. It's just again one of those where
He's not like Greg Robinson.
well, here's the thing: he can play a perfect game and then get tossed by Frank Clark on the fourth down.
Sure, and it's not going to have. We talk about where things have the most value. It's the guy throwing. It's at the initial point where the pass is thrown, dictating how accurate it is. Emmanuel Sanders gets overthrown by a couple yards. And if he's not, game might be totally different. And then the players at the catch point, your receiver, your cornerback. Mike McGlinchey is neither of those. It's not his fault. It's just positional value. But what I want to close out with here is something that's a little different, but plays a role in how I think we attacked this mock draft. And you wrote a tremendous piece. I remember when you pitched this idea to me a few weeks ago, you were like, how fragile do you think defenses are? And we talk a ton about how defense is not nearly as predictive as offense, and people write that off as, well, that means that defense is totally, you should just ignore it completely. You'll see in this mock draft, that's not how we feel.
Yep.
There are parts of a defense that do have a ton of value, particularly in coverage. So explain this to me like I am 3.5 years old, because I would say 5, but I was an above average intelligence kid. What do you mean by how fragile is your defense?
Well, so the thing that you don't, so I like to think of fragility as far as like how the whole depends upon the parts. Mm-hmm. And like, we were thinking about like, and I was introduced to this idea with thinking about like the mortgage crisis that happened 10 years ago, 20 or 15 years ago or so, when it was like, if we assume that like an entire block, like the housing market in an entire block is the independent sum of that of the houses, and one person gets foreclosed on, it's going to have a small impact on the community because essentially they're all independent, right? But in reality, one of the big mistakes that we made was not understanding the correlations between, like, okay, maybe all these people work at the same school. That school goes out of business and they're all screwed, right?
Yeah, they're not independent events.
Yeah, and the issue is probabilities when they're independent, they get multiplied together when you want to find the probability of the intersection. And as anybody knows,
all of them happening.
When you multiply the small numbers together, they get smaller. And so we tend to underestimate these like events that are relatively, infrequent, but the difference between something happening 10% of the time, 1% of the time, as we're finding out with coronavirus and things like that.
It's 10 times.
It sucks, right? So like when I look at a defense and I'm thinking to myself, okay, like how fragile is the defense? We all understand that if the best cornerback for another team gets injured, like they're gonna suck, right? We don't necessarily take into consideration, well, what about if that nickel guy gets injured? Or what about if the third or fourth guy gets hurt? Like, is that going to screw up a defense and mess with their ability to defend an offense? And so I went back and I looked at our data and I said, okay, let's look at a game a couple different ways. Let's look forward and backwards and basically come up with a way of saying, this is the 7th best coverage player on this team. This is the 6th best coverage player. And I found that game to game, the best coverage player on the team did not have the biggest effect on how well the defense played. And the second, it was more in that 3rd to 6th range. So when we're that's interesting, right? Because we think of like, okay, now is the time of year to get stars. And it's really not about that. And it probably has contributed to some of, at least I fundamentally, I'll take an L on this. Like, I did not think Kansas City would have a chance to be decent defensively because none of their players, other than like Tyrann Mathieu, like they don't have a corner that I think is any good. But they did a great job of mitigating how bad their bad players were, and that was so much better than having than buying a couple superstars, winning free agent. I think of that Tampa Bay year where they signed Michael Johnson and like Darrelle Revis and like all of them are lined up. And their defense still sucked. Well, it's because you didn't have you didn't care about the 5th house on the block, right? Like the 5th house on the block matters.
So the house analogy is great because here's how I think of it. It's like saying, okay, I'm going to go, I have this house. It's in a decent part of town. It's an okay house. I'm going to go buy a $100,000 home theater system. Oh, fucking fantastic. That's great. Your house is going to deteriorate. You're in a shitty part of town. Yeah. Who cares about your home theater? That you want the star to come in, you want to buy the Lamborghini after you have all the other things. And without those other things, that star is greatly diminished. And to me, I thought this was so cool because it underscores both where we get things wrong about defense, but also where we get things right about offense, which is offense is dictating.
Offense is anti-fragile.
And so if I say, hey, your third corner sucks and your first corner is great, the offense is going to emphasize how much the third corner sucks. And so that piece is out today.
I think it should be out today.
It should come out today
or tomorrow.
Or tomorrow, but you're going to want to go check it out. Go read the whole thing. I think we did a good job of teasing it. Let's close out with this. Let's make this like a 2-minute segment. We talked a lot about Tom Brady potentially going other places. All of them seem far-fetched to me, aside from the Patriots. We've talked about where Tom Brady should want to go, where the Patriots should want to do. If you're sitting opening night or opening Sunday, where would Tom Brady be that would make the league most exciting? I have one that I've mentioned before that I'm excited about.
Okay, so Thursday Night Football opening night should be Chargers at Chiefs.
Maybe.
And Brady should play for the Chargers.
Okay. I think that's a great one. I think that is, wow. I didn't consider that. Fuck. That is good.
Right? Because it's divisional rival.
That is
The Chargers are actually pretty good if you, like, they're.
Okay. Okay. I think mine rivals this. The team that gets thrown in our face more than any other team,
whether doesn't have their quarterback under contract.
Whether we like it or not,
yeah.
They don't have a quarterback under contract right now. They have a coach who, the Niners have a scheme. Kyle Shanahan believes in his scheme, and I think Jimmy G, he runs that scheme, right?
Yep.
Tom Brady's not going to come in and run stretch plays and boots and stuff like that. Mike McCarthy and Tom Brady could get along. I think Jerry Jones could
So that's
Can
the
have some
opening
fun.
Sunday night game. Like Cowboys Giants for like the nth.
No, not the
straight
Giants.
year.
Don't give me the Giants. Maybe Cowboys Eagles.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to have to watch the fucking Cowboys 10 times next year, maybe more,
so then
put Tom Brady on the Cowboys.
let's back this train up then.
And here's, let me make one more point. Kellen Moore, we talked about, and the reason I think this makes so much sense is that Kellen Moore is a good young offensive coordinator. They did a lot of things that were similar to what the Patriots did. They were excellent on play action. They threw on second and long. There's a lot of ways this works. Their offensive line they've invested in now. It's very good. Bring back Amari. He gets open. I'm just saying.
Here's the thing. If that happens, I'm going to look at you right now, Mr. Prescott. 2 hours west of here is a freaking good team and with a freaking good coach.
Freaking?
Welcome. If Dak Prescott's a free agent, the Colts should sign him the moment he enters. Like they should.
Dude, I'm so here for Tom Brady of the Cowboys.
If Brady goes
simply for what ends up happening to Prescott,
because Dak is a good quarterback. In an infrastructure like Indianapolis, they could. I'm not saying they would rival the Chiefs because the quarterback differential is big, but they would be the front runner to win the AFC South.
The Chargers, I think, would throw close to 40 at him.
Dak. Yeah,
because the Chargers are no one's going to Chargers games next year. No one gives a flying fuck about the Chargers.
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
So I think again, welcome to this part of the country, Dak.
Do you have any stories from the Cincy Y?
No, just because I've only been swimming with this
Okay,
calf.
I swam yesterday. I expected it to be empty because of coronavirus. Apparently, no one gives a shit.
And
everyone is at the gym.
And that was one of the I only swam like 20 laps because I was like,
you weren't there when I got down there.
I was like, I started thinking about the coronavirus, and obviously once you started thinking about the coronavirus, it's too late. So I was just like,
we didn't talk about where we took coronavirus in our draft, our mock draft. You'll want to check it out just to see that. Did we overdraft coronavirus? We'll find out. We'll be back with you guys on Monday. That's when our mock draft hits as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. Peace out.